Hi there, my name's Sarah, and this tutorial will go over some ways you can use photos in Clip Studio Paint. While CSP isn't a photo editing program per se, you can use it to do some basic color correction and cropping. Photos can be made into quick backgrounds for your art or animations, or you can turn pictures into art using a number of effects. You can use your own photos like I'm doing for this tutorial. There are also a bunch of sites online where you can download images that are in the public domain or that people have put up with a license to use for free. My favorite site is Unsplash, but there's a lot of options. Don't just grab random photos off the internet though. Photography is under copyright unless stated otherwise. Simple photo editing is a great place to start, so here's a picture I took of this gorgeous hawk in my neighborhood. It was a great subject, very talkative. Let's say we'd like to crop this picture down to a square. Go to Edit, and select Change Canvas Size. Here you can drag any of the handles to change the crop, or click and drag in the middle to move it around. To get a square, change the width and height to match each other, then hold Shift to make sure it stays square as you resize it. Press OK when you're done. There are a lot of color correction tools in Clip Studio Paint, and I'm only going to touch on a few here. Let me know if there are any you'd like to see me cover in detail. Here are some pretty oleander flowers, but they're a little dull. Let's start by going to Edit, Tonal Correction, and selecting Brightness Contrast. A quick way to enhance a washed out photo is by upping the contrast and lowering the brightness. I'll cancel that so we can look at a more advanced tool. Go to Edit, Tonal Correction, and choose Level Correction. This one shows a histogram, basically a graph of the color information in your image. For example, in this image, you can see at a glance that we're missing a lot of darker tones. Move this slider to compensate, and the picture instantly looks better. Tweak the sliders to your liking. The output bar at the bottom removes darker and brighter information from the image, which isn't what we want in this case. Right now we're adjusting all colors in the image, but in this drop-down you can choose to adjust them one at a time. Here's where output comes in handy. There's a little too much green in the upper tonal range of this picture, so if I bump it down a bit, suddenly the pink of the flowers really pops without losing the green of the darker background leaves. If I toggle preview, you can see the difference. So level correction is similar to brightness contrast, but with more control. And speaking of colors, if you want to do some fine color tweaking, go to Edit, Tonal Correction, and choose Color Balance. Each of these sliders allows you to move between a warmer and cooler hue, cyan to red, magenta to green, or yellow to blue. Initially, we're editing the mid-range of tones in the image, but you can switch to the highlights and change the sliders here, or change to shadow and do the same. The last tool I'll talk about can be found under Edit, Tonal Correction, Hue, Saturation, Luminosity. Simply put, you can use this to shift the colors, how vivid the colors are, and how bright. You can also use the saturation slider to make your photo grayscale. Up to now we've been making edits that permanently change the image. However, in the Layer menu, under New Correction Layer, you'll find basically the same features listed. These work a little different though. These are something called non-destructive adjustments. Choosing one will add a new layer above your photo. This gives you the same effect, but you can turn it on and off. Double-clicking a correction layer allows you to edit its properties. You can also layer multiple correction layers on top of each other. Notice that they always come with a built-in layer mask that you can edit. If you're unfamiliar with how to use layer masks, I've got a whole video on them. Correction layers normally affect all layers underneath them, but putting it in a folder means it'll be limited to only the other layers in that folder. This is because the folder's blending mode is set to normal. If you set it to through, the correction layer's effect will pass through to the layers underneath. If you make a selection before creating a correction layer, it will automatically apply the selection as a mask. Likewise, if you make a selection before using any of the tonal correction features, only the selection will be affected. Those are several ways you can edit photos in Clip Studio Paint, but what about using them in your art? Say you've got a character, but you want to make the presentation of your drawing a little more interesting. Let's start with this photo I took in northern Arizona. A really easy and fun setting is the layer tone. Just click this button to enable it. It looks grayscale, but when I zoom in, you'll see it's converted the layer to pure black and white values. This is a method to make images cheaper to print, but it also has a really cool look of its own. You can change both the size and shape of the dots. There are a lot of settings, so don't be afraid to play around with it. One of my favorites is to change the shape to line, which makes it almost look like cross-hatching. And again, this is a non-destructive adjustment, so you can just turn it off whenever you want. Here, I've added my unicorn drawing, adjusted the angle of the lines to suit the art better, and added an outline around my line art so it stands out. Not bad at all! Another effect you can use to make backgrounds is the Gaussian Blur. Here's a lovely foggy clifftop photo I took when I was in England. And here's one of my dragons. If I copy him from here, and plop him into this scene with a few hue, saturation, luminosity edits like I showed you earlier, he fits pretty nicely. But the realism of the photo is a little distracting. With the photo layer selected, go to Filter, Blur, and select Gaussian Blur. It's a simple effect. The higher the strength, the more it blurs. Of course, you can also just leave out the characters and turn your photos into art. Here are a couple ways to do that. You probably noticed that bumping the corrective effects I showed you earlier to their extremes gives you some pretty wild results. If you've got a picture like my hawk here that has a lot of contrast and concentrated color, try going to Layer, New Correction Layer, and adding Posterization. Using a lower number of levels reduces the colors in the image, which can give you a really striking pop art effect. One last feature I'll talk about is an effect that can turn photos into line art. Go to Filter, Effect, Artistic. The color portion of this tool is similar to Posterization, but the part I think is really cool is the lines. Again, this works best with photos with a lot of stark contrast. Change the Process drop-down to Lines Only. Adjust the various line settings for thickness, simplicity, and density to your liking. Turn the opacity all the way up. The amount of anti-aliasing will depend on the size of your image. You can zoom in by holding Ctrl, Space, and left-clicking. Reducing it all the way will give you pure black and white, and too much goes quite blurry. Usually, you'll want a value in between. Use Ctrl 0 to return the image to full screen. Hit OK. You'll see if I remove the background, the photo's color has been completely removed, leaving only the outlines. These are just a few ideas of how to use photos in Clip Studio Paint, and I've barely scratched the surface. Don't be afraid to experiment with different tools and effects. How do you use photos in your art workflow? Let me know in the comments or tag me at Ms.RedNebula on socials and show me your art. And that's it for this one. Bye! A big thank you to all of my patrons, with a special shout out to Nova Tier patron Joe C. Phipps. Check out my Patreon if you'd like to help support future content like this.